The dust settled in thin veils across the main street of Weaverville, California, as the afternoon sun beat down upon the wooden boardwalks where Nicholas Thornton stood anxiously adjusting his collar. The year was 1876, and after months of correspondence with a woman from Boston who had agreed to be his bride, he found himself waiting outside the small chapel at the edge of town, his heart thundering louder than the approaching stagecoach in the distance. Nicky to his friends had spent 5 years building his ranch from nothing after returning from the war. At 32, he had a sprawling property, a decent herd of cattle, and a house he'd built with his own 2 hands. What he didn't have was someone to share it with. The loneliness of the long nights had finally driven him to place an advertisement in a Boston newspaper, seeking a bride willing to make a new life in the West. Katherine Collins had responded with letters that were both thoughtful and spirited. Her penmanship was neat, her words carefully chosen yet warm enough to make Nicky feel as though he already knew her. She was 26, unmarried, and working as a teacher back east, circumstances she described as increasingly stifling. Her parents had passed, leaving her with no family ties to keep her in Boston. She wrote of her desire for adventure, for open spaces, for a life different from the one she'd known. Today was the day she would arrive, and they would be married immediately after as arranged. Reverend Michaels waited inside the chapel, and several of Nicky's friends had gathered to witness the ceremony. The stagecoach was late, which wasn't unusual given the treacherous mountain passes between Sacramento and Weaverville, but it did nothing to calm his nerves. "Settle down, Thornton," said his friend Samuel Cooper, slapping him on the back. "Your bride will be here. Stagecoach is probably just running behind because of that rockslide they had on the pass last week." I know," Nicky said, running his fingers through his thick, dark hair. "It's just what if she takes one look at me and changes her mind?" "Then she's a fool," Samuel replied with a laugh. "You're the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. Half the widows in town would happily take her place." The sound of hooves and wheels finally broke through their conversation. The stagecoach appeared around the bend, dust billowing behind it as it rolled toward the center of town. Nicky's mouth went dry and he tugged at his collar again. "That's it," Samuel said. "Go on then, go meet your bride." Nicky crossed the street, his Sunday boots clicking against the hard, packed dirt. The stagecoach came to a stop, and the driver jumped down to open the door. First came an elderly couple, then a young man in a suit too fine for Weaverville, and finally, a woman in a blue traveling dress. Even coated in dust from the journey, she was beautiful. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a small hat, and her eyes green as the spring grass darted around nervously before settling on him. Recognition flickered across her face, likely from the description he'd provided in his letters. "Miss Collins," he called, stepping forward. "Mr. Thornton," she replied with a smile that transformed her tired face. He moved to help her down from the coach, taking her gloved hand in his. As her feet touched the ground, he noticed how pale she looked beneath the layer of trail dust. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, his voice suddenly hoarse with emotion. "The pleasure is mine," she responded, but her voice sounded weak, and he noticed a slight sway in her stance. "Are you all right, Miss Collins?" "Just tired from the journey," it was. "Longer than I anticipated." "Of course. We can delay the ceremony if you'd like to rest." "No," she interrupted. "I'd prefer to honor our arrangement. I'm quite ready to be Mrs. Thornton." Something in her voice made him wonder if there was more to her eagerness than simple adherence to their agreement, but he didn't press the matter. They collected her trunk and carpet bag from the stagecoach, and Nicky carried them as they walked toward the chapel. "The town is smaller than I imagined," she commented, looking around at the handful of buildings that constituted Weaverville's Main Street. "It's growing every year," he assured her. "The gold might be dwindling, but cattle ranching is proving profitable. There's a proper school now, too, although they're always short of qualified teachers." Her eyes brightened at that. "Perhaps I might be of service in that regard once I'm settled." "I think they'd be lucky to have you," he said, meaning it. From her letters, he knew she was educated and passionate about learning. As they approached the chapel, Katherine suddenly stopped walking. "Mr. Thornton, Nicholas," she said, her voice barely audible. "I feel rather—" He turned just in time to see her eyes roll back. The color drained completely from her face as she crumpled toward the ground. Dropping her luggage, Nicky lunged forward, catching her before she hit the dirt. Her body was light in his arms, too light, he thought with alarm. "Katherine," he called, patting her cheek gently. "Miss Collins." Samuel came running from the chapel steps. "What happened?" She fainted, Nicky said, gathering her more securely in his arms. "Run and fetch Dr. Reed. Tell him to come to the chapel immediately." As Samuel took off down the street, Nicky carried Katherine the remaining distance to the chapel. Her breathing was shallow, her skin hot to the touch despite the coolness of the evening approaching. Reverend Michaels held the door open, his expression concerned. "She's ill," Nicky explained, carrying her inside and laying her gently on a pew. "Samuel's gone for the doctor." "Poor dear," said Mrs. Michaels, the Reverend's wife, who had been arranging flowers at the altar. "The journey must have been too much for her." Nicky knelt beside Katherine, taking her limp hand in his. This wasn't how he'd imagined their meeting or their wedding day. But as he looked at her face, peaceful in unconsciousness, he felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever was wrong, he would make sure she received the care she needed. Dr. Thomas Reed arrived within minutes, medical bag in hand. He was a young doctor, only a few years older than Nicky, but he'd earned the town's respect with his dedication and skill. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling beside Katherine and immediately checking her pulse. "She just arrived on the stagecoach," Nicky explained. "We were walking to the chapel for the wedding when she collapsed. She mentioned being tired from the journey, but nothing else." Dr. Reed's fingers pressed against Katherine's wrist as he counted silently. His frown deepened. "Her pulse is rapid, and she's burning with fever." He placed a hand on her forehead, then opened his bag. "How long was she on the stagecoach?" "Nearly 2 weeks, I believe. She came from Boston." "That's a grueling journey, especially for a woman traveling alone," the doctor said. He pulled out a stethoscope and listened to her chest. "Her lungs don't sound clear. I'm concerned she may have developed pneumonia during the trip." Nicky's heart sank. "Is it serious?" Dr. Reed met his eyes gravely. "It can be, especially after such exhaustion. She needs rest, clean air, and proper care." He reached into his bag for a small bottle. "This will help reduce her fever. Mix 5 drops with water every 4 hours." Katherine stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "What's happening?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You're in the chapel, Miss Collins," Nicky said, squeezing her hand gently. "You fainted." "The doctor's here." Her eyes opened, confusion evident in their depths before understanding dawned. "The wedding, don't worry about that now," Nicky assured her. "First, we need to get you well." "But our agreement will stand," he promised. "Rest now, doctor." Reed continued his examination, asking Katherine questions about her journey and any symptoms she'd experienced. She admitted to feeling unwell for several days but had attributed it to the difficult travel conditions. "I didn't want to delay our meeting," she explained weakly, looking at Nicky. "I was afraid you might reconsider." The vulnerability in her admission touched him deeply. "I wouldn't have," he assured her. "She needs a proper place to recover," Dr. Reed said, packing up his instruments. "Somewhere clean and quiet." She'll come to the ranch with me, Nicky said without hesitation. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat. Mr. Thornton, while I understand the circumstances are unusual, it wouldn't be proper for Miss Collins to stay at your home without the benefit of marriage. Nicky hadn't considered the impropriety, focused only on Catherine's well-being. Then we'll marry now, quickly, before taking her to rest. I can't allow that either, Dr. Reed interjected. She's in no condition to consent to marriage. She needs care, not a wedding ceremony. Catherine's fingers tightened around Nicky's. Please, she whispered. I came all this way. Mrs. Michaels stepped forward. She can stay with us until she's recovered. The parsonage has a spare room and I can look after her. Relief flooded Nicky's face. Thank you, Mrs. Michaels. That would be most appreciated. And once she's well, you can proceed with your plans, Reverend Michaels added. Dr. Reed nodded his approval. I'll check on her daily. For now, let's get her settled. Nicky lifted Katherine again, cradling her against his chest as he followed the Reverend and his wife to the small house adjacent to the chapel. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling. I'm sorry, she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. You have nothing to be sorry for, he assured her. Getting you well is all that matters now. In the parsonage spare room, Mrs. Michaels quickly prepared the bed while Nicky waited with Katherine in his arms. Once the sheets were turned down, he gently laid her on the mattress. I'll fetch her things from outside, he said, reluctant to leave her side but knowing she needed her belongings. When he returned with her trunk and carpet bag, Mrs. Michaels was already helping Katherine out of her traveling clothes and into a nightgown. He left the items by the door and stepped outside to give them privacy. Dr. Reed was waiting in the small sitting room. Mr. Thornton, I should tell you that pneumonia can be quite serious. While I believe Miss Collins is strong, her exhaustion from the journey places her at greater risk. Nicky's throat tightened. What can I do? Visit her, keep her spirits up. Mrs. Michaels will handle her physical care, but knowing you're not abandoning her will be important for her recovery. I would never abandon her, Nicky said firmly. She came here to be my wife, but more than that, she trusted me enough to travel across the country. I won't let her down. Dr. Reed nodded, satisfied. Good man. I'll return in the morning to check on her condition. After the doctor left, Nicky paced the small room until Mrs. Michaels emerged. She's asking for you, the older woman said. Just a few minutes, mind you. She needs rest. Katherine was propped against several pillows, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. Without the dust of travel, her skin appeared even paler, with 2 bright spots of fever coloring her cheeks. Yet she smiled when she saw him. This isn't quite the wedding night I promised you in my letters, she said, attempting humor despite her obvious weakness. Nicky sat carefully on the edge of the bed. There'll be time for that when you're well. And if I don't recover? She asked, her directness surprising him. You will, he insisted. You're stronger than you know, Katherine Collins. She studied his face. You're not what I expected, Nicholas Thornton. Is that good or bad? Good, she whispered. Very good. He took her hand, which felt small and hot in his own. Rest now. I'll visit tomorrow and the next day and every day until you're well enough to become my wife. Promise? I promise. As he stood to leave, she caught his hand again. Thank you for not sending me back. The thought hadn't even occurred to him. This is your home now, Katherine. Whether you're my wife tomorrow or next month doesn't change that. Her eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away. I chose well, it seems. As did I, he replied softly. Now sleep. Doctor's orders. Over the next week, Nicky visited Katherine daily, bringing fresh flowers from his garden and news from around town. Her condition fluctuated. Some days her fever seemed to break, only to return with greater intensity by nightfall. Dr. Reed remained cautiously optimistic, but warned Nikki that recovery from pneumonia was rarely straightforward. During his visits, they began to truly know each other beyond their letters. Katherine told him about her life in Boston, her years teaching at a girls' school, the pressure to marry men she didn't love, her parents' deaths from influenza 3 years prior. After they died, there was nothing keeping me in Boston except habit, she explained one afternoon, sitting up in bed for the first time in days. When I saw your advertisement, something about your words called to me. You didn't want a servant or a broodmare. You wanted a partner. Nikki nodded, touched by her perception. My mother taught me that marriage should be a partnership of equals. My father never made a significant decision without consulting her, and she respected his judgment equally. That's rare, Katherine commented. Most men I knew in Boston viewed wives as beautiful possessions at best, household managers at worst. And what do you want from marriage? He asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question seriously. Respect, companionship, the freedom to contribute my talents and thoughts, and… She hesitated, color rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. And affection, I suppose. Those all seem reasonable expectations, he said, his own face warming. And you, what do you want beyond a partner? It was his turn to consider carefully. Someone to share the sunsets with. Someone who understands that building something, a ranch, a family, a life requires patience and perseverance. Someone who sees beauty in simple things. He paused. And children someday, though I'm in no rush. Katherine's smile was tinged with sadness. I want children too. I've spent years teaching other people's children. I'd like to have my own. On the 10th day after her arrival, Dr. Reed pronounced Katherine significantly improved. Her fever had finally broken completely, and though she was still weak, her lungs sounded clearer. You can begin taking short walks, the doctor advised. Fresh air will do you good, though you should avoid exertion. That afternoon, Nikki arrived with his wagon rather than on horseback. I thought you might like to see the town properly, he suggested, if you're feeling up to it. Katherine, dressed in a simple day dress for the first time since her collapse, nodded eagerly. I'd love that. Mrs. Michaels is wonderful, but I'm beginning to memorize the patterns in the wallpaper. He helped her into the wagon, noticing how thin she'd become during her illness. We'll start putting some meat on your bones, he promised. My housekeeper, Mrs. Adler, is already planning feasts for when you arrive at the ranch. You have a housekeeper? Katherine asked, surprised. You never mentioned her in your letters. She comes 3 times a week to cook and clean. She's a widow, nearly 60, with a sharp tongue and hands that make the best biscuits in the territory. He clicked to the horses, and the wagon began to move. She's been pestering me for details about you since I first wrote to Boston. Katherine laughed, the sound brightening her tired face. And what have you told her? That you're educated, kind, and brave enough to journey across the country to marry a stranger. Hardly a stranger now, she said softly. He guided the wagon slowly down Weaverville's Main Street, pointing out the general store, the assayer's office, the saloon, which he diplomatically called an establishment I rarely frequent, and the small schoolhouse at the far end of town. It's not much compared to Boston, he admitted. It has charm, she insisted, and possibility. That's more valuable than grand buildings and crowded streets. As they passed the school, a bell rang and children spilled out into the yard. Katherine watched them with obvious longing. The school term ends next week, Nikki mentioned. I hear they haven't found a teacher for the fall yet. She turned to him, eyes bright with interest. Really? The town council would snap up a qualified teacher from Boston in an instant, he continued. If such a person were interested, of course. Would you mind? She asked, searching his face. If your wife were to teach, why would I mind gaining the admiration of the town for being married to their children's beloved teacher? He countered with a smile. Besides, the ranch is only 3 miles from town. You could ride in each day, weather permitting. The relief on her face was palpable. In Boston, most men expect their wives to give up teaching once married. It's considered unseemly. Well, this isn't Boston, Nicky said firmly, and I'm not most men. After showing her the town, he drove the wagon toward his ranch, wanting her to see her future home even if she couldn't stay yet. As they crested a hill, the property came into view, a substantial 2-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains. Katherine gasped. "It's beautiful. Your letters didn't do it justice." Pride swelled in his chest. "I built the house myself with some help from friends. Took nearly 2 years. You built this?" she asked, clearly impressed. "Before the war, I apprenticed as a carpenter. Those skills came in handy out here." He pointed to a fenced garden beside the house. "That's where I got the flowers I've been bringing you. Mrs. Adler insisted we needed one when she started working for me." The tour continued around the property, with Nicky showing her the barn, the chicken coop, and the small orchard he'd planted 3 years earlier. "The trees are just starting to produce well," he explained. "We should have apples and pears come fall." Katherine's eyes were wide with wonder. "It's like something from a storybook," she said. "A real home." "It will be," he agreed. "Once you're in it." 2 more weeks passed before Dr. Reed finally declared Katherine fully recovered. During that time, Nicky had arranged with the town council for her to interview for the teaching position, which she secured easily with her credentials and obvious passion for education. The wedding was rescheduled for Saturday afternoon. The night before, Nicky found himself unable to sleep, a mixture of excitement and nervousness keeping him awake. He rose before dawn and spent the morning making sure everything at the ranch was perfect for Katherine's arrival. Mrs. Adler fussed around the house, arranging fresh flowers and preparing special dishes for the wedding supper they would share upon returning from town. "About time you brought a wife home," she declared, rolling out pie dough with practiced efficiency. "This house needs a woman's touch." "It has yours," Nicky pointed out. "Not the same, and you know it," she replied. "Miss Collins seems a sensible sort, pretty too from what you've said." "She's beautiful," he agreed. "But more than that, she's brave and intelligent. You'll like her, Mrs. Adler." The older woman's expression softened. "I already do, Mr. Thornton. Anyone who puts that light in your eyes is all right by me." At the appointed hour, Nicky drove to town in his freshly painted wagon, dressed in his best suit. He'd shaved carefully and trimmed his hair, wanting to look his best for Katherine. When he arrived at the parsonage, Mrs. Michaels met him at the door. "She's nearly ready," she said with a motherly smile. "And might I say, she looks radiant." Nicky waited in the small sitting room, hat in hand, heart pounding. When the bedroom door opened and Katherine stepped out, he couldn't help the small gasp that escaped him. She wore a simple cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant twist with small white flowers tucked into the coils. The sickness had left her thinner, but her eyes shone with health and happiness. "You look," he began, words failing him. "Acceptable," she suggested with a teasing smile. "Perfect," he finished. "Absolutely perfect," she blushed prettily. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Thornton." He offered his arm. "Shall we? I believe there's a reverend waiting to make you my wife." "I've kept him waiting long enough," she replied, slipping her hand through his arm. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. The chapel was filled with townspeople, many of whom had come to know Katherine during her convalescence. Nikki had only a few close friends in attendance, but their presence meant more than a church full of acquaintances. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Nikki gently lifted Catherine's veil and kissed her with a tenderness that belied the passion building within him. Her lips were soft beneath his, and she responded with a shy eagerness that promised much for their future together. The wedding supper at the ranch was a joyous affair. Mrs. Adler outdid herself with roast beef, fresh vegetables from the garden, and 3 different pies. Katherine charmed everyone, especially Nikki's ranch hands, who awkwardly presented her with a hand-carved wooden box they'd made as a wedding gift. As the sun set and their guests departed, Nikki found himself alone with his wife for the first time. They stood on the porch, watching the golden light fade from the mountains. "Happy?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned against him. "More than I thought possible." "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. Katherine turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for carrying me into that chapel when I couldn't walk, for calling the doctor, for waiting." "I would have waited forever," he admitted. Their life together began in earnest that night, as they discovered each other with tender exploration and growing passion. Katherine proved to be as brave and forthright in the bedroom as she was in all other aspects of her life, surprising Nikki with her uninhibited responses to his touches. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay tangled together beneath the sheets, Katherine traced patterns on his chest. "I never told you why I was so desperate to honor our agreement that first day," she said softly. Nikki stroked her hair. "I assumed it was the journey's expense or eagerness to begin our life together." "Partly," she admitted, "but also. There was a man in Boston, a colleague at the school who became insistent about his attentions after my parents died." Nikki's arm tightened around her. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she assured him. "But he made it clear that as a woman alone with limited means, I had few options. He was the headmaster's son, influential in the community. When I refused his proposal, he made my position at the school uncomfortable. So you answered my advertisement." "I had already been considering it," she said. "Your letter arrived the day after a particularly unpleasant encounter with him. It felt like Providence." Nikki kissed her forehead. "I'm glad you came to me, though I'm sorry for the circumstances that drove you here." "Don't be," she said firmly. "They led me to you, to this place, to happiness I never thought possible." As summer progressed into fall, Katherine settled into life at the ranch while preparing for her first term as Weaverville's schoolteacher. She transformed the house with small touches, curtains she sewed herself, framed pressed wildflowers she collected on walks, bookshelves Nikki built to hold her extensive collection of books. The school term began in September, and Katherine quickly won the hearts of her students and their parents with her innovative teaching methods and genuine care for each child's progress. Nikki often rode into town to escort her home, proudly watching as she locked the schoolhouse door, her arms full of papers to grade. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. "I ask myself the same question every day," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. They had been married nearly 6 months when Katherine missed her monthly cycle. After the second month passed with the same result, she consulted Dr. Reed, who confirmed her suspicions. That evening, she prepared Nikki's favorite meal and waited nervously for him to return from working with the cattle. When he entered the kitchen, dusty and tired, he immediately noticed the special effort she'd made. "What's the occasion?" he asked, washing his hands at the basin. Katherine twisted her apron between her fingers. "I visited Dr. Reed today." Alarm crossed his face. "Are you ill? Is the pneumonia—" "No, nothing like that," she interrupted quickly. I'm perfectly healthy, better than healthy, actually." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby, Nikki." In the spring, his expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby, you're sure?" She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Dr. Reed says I'm about 3 months along. The baby should arrive in April." Nikki crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle, his joy too great for words. When he set her down, he dropped to his knees before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "I'm your pa." Katherine laughed through her tears, running her fingers through his hair. "He or she can't hear you yet." "Doesn't matter," he replied, looking up at her with such love that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "I want our child to know from the very beginning how wanted, how loved they are." The news of Katherine's pregnancy spread quickly through Weaverville. The town council, concerned about having their teacher unavailable midterm, worked out an arrangement where Katherine would teach until she felt unable, and the minister's wife would substitute for the remainder of the school year. Winter came early that year, with heavy snowfall isolating the ranch for days at a time. Katherine used the forced confinement to prepare for the baby, sewing tiny garments and reading every book on child-rearing she could find. Nikki worked on building a cradle, carving intricate patterns of leaves and flowers into the headboard. As Katherine's body changed, Nikki found new ways to express his love and desire for her. His hands would linger on the growing curve of her belly, his eyes following her with undisguised admiration. "You've never been more beautiful," he told her one night as she stood before the mirror, frowning at her changing silhouette. "I'm as big as a house," she complained. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and splaying his hands over her rounded stomach. "You're carrying our child. There's nothing more beautiful than that." Spring brought thawing snow, newborn calves, and increasing anticipation. Katherine had stopped teaching in March, when the journey to town became too uncomfortable. Mrs. Adler now stayed at the ranch full-time, preparing for the birth and teaching Katherine everything she knew about caring for infants. On a mild April morning, Katherine woke Nikki with a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," she said calmly, though her eyes betrayed her nervousness. He was instantly alert. "Are you sure? Should I get Mrs. Adler?" "Yes to both," she replied, wincing as a contraction tightened her belly. The next 12 hours were the longest of Nikki's life. Banished from the bedroom by Mrs. Adler, who had sent for Dr. Reed at first light, he paced the house, jumping at every sound from upstairs. Samuel Cooper arrived mid-morning, having heard the news in town, and stayed to keep Nikki company. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," Samuel reminded him. "Katherine's strong and Dr. Reed knows his business." "I know," Nikki said, running his hands through his hair for the 100th time. "But what if something goes wrong?" What if he was interrupted by a cry from upstairs, not Katherine's voice, but a higher, indignant wail that could only be one thing? Nikki froze, eyes locked on the staircase. Mrs. Adler appeared at the top of the stairs, her usually stern face split by a broad smile. "Mr. Thornton," she called, "come meet your son." Nikki took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding. In the bedroom, he found Katherine propped against pillows, her face flushed and damp with perspiration but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Nicholas," she said softly, "meet William Thornton." Nikki approached the bed cautiously, overwhelmed by the moment. Dr. Reed patted his shoulder before quietly leaving the room with Mrs. Adler, giving the new family privacy. Perching carefully on the edge of the bed, Nikki gazed down at his son's face. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his own and Katherine's delicate nose. As he watched, William's eyes opened briefly, revealing a glimpse of blue. "He's perfect," Nicky whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. William's fingers reflexively curled around his father's index finger, holding with surprising strength. "Strong, too. Like his father," Katherine said, leaning forward to kiss Nicky's cheek. "And brave like his mother," Nicky added, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Katherine, for coming to me, for creating this family with me." She smiled, tired but genuinely happy. "Who would have thought that collapsing at a chapel door would lead to this?" "I knew the moment I carried you inside," he admitted. "Somewhere deep down, I knew you were meant to be mine, and I yours." William grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's love of learning. By the time he was 3, Katherine was teaching again, this time with William in tow, fascinated by the older children and already learning his letters. The spring after William's 4th birthday brought another addition to the family, a daughter they named Elizabeth, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes. William took his role as big brother seriously, solemnly promising his father to help protect his little sister. As their family grew, so did the ranch. Nicky's careful management and Katherine's sharp business sense turned it into one of the most prosperous in the county. They added rooms to the house, hired more hands, and expanded their operations to include not only cattle but horses bred specifically for the U.S. cavalry. One evening, 10 years after Katherine had first arrived in Weaverville, they sat on the porch watching William and Elizabeth play with the new collie puppy Nicky had brought home. The setting sun painted the mountains gold and pink, a sight that still took Katherine's breath away after all these years. "You ever regret it?" Nicky asked suddenly. "Coming here, marrying a man you only knew through letters?" She turned to him, surprised by the question. "Never. Not for a single moment. Even when you were so ill, when you thought you might die in a strange town surrounded by strangers." Katherine took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his as they had countless times over the years. "You were never a stranger to me, Nicholas Thornton. Your letters showed me your soul before I ever saw your face." He raised their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I thank God every day for whatever courage or desperation sent you across the country to me." "It wasn't desperation," she said firmly. "It was hope. Hope for something better, something real." She smiled, watching their children's laughter. And look what that hope created. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Thornton family with it. When William turned 18, he announced his intention to attend college in San Francisco to study veterinary medicine, planning to return to the ranch afterward with new skills to contribute. Elizabeth, at 14, was already showing signs of following in her mother's footsteps, often helping younger students after school. She had her mother's gift for explanation and her father's patience. That summer, during the town's Independence Day celebration, Reverend Michael's now white-haired but still serving the community approached Nicky and Katherine as they watched the festivities. "I was just reminiscing," the old man said, "about the day Miss Collins arrived in Weaverville. Do you remember, Mr. Thornton, how you carried her into my chapel when she collapsed?" Nicky smiled, his arm around Katherine's waist. "As if it were yesterday, Reverend." "I often think it was divine providence," the Reverend continued. "Had she not fallen ill, you two might not have had the chance to truly know each other before marriage." Katherine leaned against her husband's strong shoulder. "I believe you're right, Reverend. Those weeks of recovery gave us time to build a foundation that has never faltered." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Reverend Michaels said with a nod. "I've married dozens of couples over the years, but few have shown the devotion I've witnessed in you two." After the Reverend moved on to greet other townspeople, Nicky pulled Katherine slightly away from the crowd. In the shadow of an oak tree, he wrapped both arms around her waist, looking down into the face he'd woken up to for over a decade. "You know what today is, besides Independence Day?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "The day I arrived in Weaverville." "Exactly 15 years ago today," he confirmed. 15 years since I carried you into that chapel." "The best 15 years of my life," she said softly. "Mine too," he agreed. "And I intend for the next 15 to be even better." Katherine reached up to touch the silver now threading through his dark hair. "How could they possibly be better?" "Because each day with you is better than the last," he said simply. "Because watching our children grow, seeing you still passionate about teaching, building this life together, it gets sweeter with time. Like good wine," she suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," he laughed, bending to kiss her. From across the town square, William watched his parents with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "They're kissing again," he complained to his sister, though without real annoyance. Elizabeth sighed romantically. "I hope I find a love like that someday." "Like what?" William asked. "The kind that starts with being carried over a threshold and ends with silver hair and still kissing in public," she explained. "The kind that builds something lasting." William considered his sister's words, looking back at their parents who were now walking hand in hand toward them, faces lit with the same love he'd known his entire life. "I guess that would be all right," he conceded. "If you have to get married, that's the kind to aim for." As Nicky and Katherine reached their children, they formed a circle of family strength: the mail-order bride who had collapsed at a chapel door, the cowboy who had carried her inside and called a doctor, and the children born from that unexpected beginning. Together, they represented everything that was possible when love overcame obstacles, when hope triumphed over fear, when two people recognized in each other the answer to prayers they hadn't even known they'd voiced. And as the fireworks began to explode over Weaverville, painting the night sky with brilliant colors, Nicky pulled his family close, grateful for every step of the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment.